The ICE raids were very successful. People came into our country illegally. Many were felons. Many were convicted of crimes. Many were taken out on Sunday. You just didn't know about it.
That the president talking about those raids we've been hearing so much about for the past several weeks. As recently as last month, the president tweeted that millions of people would be removed. But now that number, it's in the thousands as the administration looks to deport people who they say are not eligible to remain in the states. Mayors of two of the largest cities being targeted, New York and Chicago, they're speaking out. Take a listen.
This is not about the security of the people of this country, and it's not about enforcing the law. This is a political act by this president, and he's stoking fear, and he's trying to pit immigrant against citizen.
Disrupting families who are just here trying to live their life. That's not who we are or should be as Americans.
Then, of course, there's the overcrowded detention facilities for migrants at the border. Vice President Mike Pence, he recently toured two of them in McAllen, Texas, seeing firsthand how hundreds of people are being packed into cages. The floor concrete, so crowded most of the men can't lie down. There are only blankets made of foil. And reporters who've accompanied Pence say the stench unbearable. Plus, many of the detainees say they've been there for weeks without showers and they cannot even brush their teeth. Now, the vice president, after all that, still had the following to say.
President Trump wanted us to be here, and he wanted the cameras to be here so that you could see firsthand how these families are being treated. Each and every one of the children, each and every one of the parents that I spoke to told me they were being treated well.
Plus, you now have the administration just announcing major changes when it comes to asylum rules, and they're due to kick in tomorrow. Most of the migrants who come from South America or Latin America, they'd be denied asylum protections under the new regulations. But they make an exception for victims of human trafficking. Groups are already lining up to challenge this new standard in court. Earlier today, Andrea, he spoke with a woman who is helping migrants deal with what is going on. Andrea Guttin, she is legal director at the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative.
Andrea, let's start with the ICE raids this weekend, which did not seem to go off as advertised. They were fewer than expected, but with promises that they'll continue. We saw some minor raids in New York City. I'm wondering what you're seeing in Houston.
Yeah, here in Houston, the Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative, we run a hotline that we extended the hours over the weekend, and we're running it this week as well. We've had a lot of calls from Houstonians who want to know their rights to be able to assert themselves if ICE comes to their home or if they encounter ICE in their neighborhoods. We've been giving a lot of know your rights information, sending people pictures of the difference between an administrative warrant and a warrant signed by a judge that would actually give ICE the power to come into their homes since they don't usually have one. But we've also been receiving a lot of phone calls from people who have family members in detention already, not because of these raids, but I think it's very important to understand that people are being detained in ICE custody every single day, and families are being separated, whether or not these targeted raids are happening.
And I'll get to some of those details in just a moment, Andrea, but the whole way this was rolled out didn't seem to make any sense to me. If it's a deterrent, as the White House has said it wants to make these sorts of moves, you want the visual of people being arrested, and we didn't see that. If the real concern is about public safety, if you think people are in danger, you want to act fast, and you don't announce it in advance, which to my mind leaves just politics and imaging as the driving rationale. I'm curious what your sense is on why, if these raids are happening, they're not keeping up with the PR behind them, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this whole administration has been terrorizing immigrants from their rhetoric to family separation to these raids that they say are on, then are off again, then are on. And it's really, state-sponsored terrorism for these families that are just waiting to see what's going to happen and, are on high alert in their communities.
The president, as recently as this morning, tried to frame the people who are the targets of these raids as being the worst of the worst. They just as soon kill you as look at you. Who are in fact, the people who are the targets of these raids, and what have they done? Are they as dangerous as the president has tried to make them sound?
Yeah, I mean, earlier reports from ICE said that they were targeting families with deportation orders. Large numbers of these families with deportation orders didn't know about their court date. They didn't have notice to go to court, so they didn't show up. and if you don't show up to court, you get ordered deported. There's no indication that this is anyone with any kind of criminal background. And if they do have a criminal arrest, it might be for illegal entry or re-entry at the border, which is on the statutes and is something that should probably be repealed because it's pretty outrageous to be charging an asylum seeker with illegal entry.
You mentioned the information that your group and others are providing to potentially impacted families to know your rights, to make sure, for example, not to open the door unless the agents have a warrant that's been signed by a judge. First of all, don't these agents all have warrants? Why wouldn't they? And if not, do they have the wrong people, or are they just following the wrong procedure?
So they have administrative warrants that would give them the authority to arrest someone in a public space, but don't give them authority to enter into someone's home. In order to do that, they need a judicial warrant signed by a judge to invade the protection and privacy of someone's home. Otherwise, it is an illegal search under our Fourth Amendment. So they have to get consent from someone to enter in, and there are numerous reports of past raids of ICE using coercion, intimidation, having weapons drawn to try and obtain the so-called consent to enter someone's home.
A lot of these families are going to wind up at another detention center. The vice president was at one over the weekend and took pains to say we didn't scrub or prep these for PR purposes, and celebrated how great the conditions were, even though the photos made them look pretty crowded to my eye, and the eye test of every center we've seen really doesn't agree with what Pence has said. Even DHS has put out a report saying that there are poor conditions. I'm wondering, though, if the conditions were bad before and we're ramping up the raids and detentions, there's no way the conditions at those centers are going to improve now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to know that there are two different types of facilities. The Customs and Border Protection facilities on the border, the so-called ice boxes and dog kennels, where they host people are supposed to be there for 1 or 2 days before they're transferred to the more long-term ICE detention centers, Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention facilities, or they're released on parole while their courts are pending. So right now, people are being held in those border protection facilities that the air conditioning is turned very high up. There are extreme overcrowding. People are sleeping on the floor. People haven't been bathing. They haven't given them enough food. They have been staying in those conditions for over 30 days, which is, it's outrageous. Those are not facilities that are meant to house people for short amounts of time. Setting aside the question about whether we should be warehousing huge number of immigrants who are seeking asylum here, they certainly should not be housed in those conditions for any period of time.
And that's on our side of the border, in our custody. Now there's word that the Trump administration wants to try and restrict the asylum process even more and have the asylum seekers remain in a third country. For most people at our southern border, that would be Mexico, which I suppose sounds reasonable, easy enough to say from a TV studio in New York. But what do we know about what life is like on the ground for migrants in Mexico? And are there enough resources to keep even more people there and keep them safe, fed, healthy during their long wait on their asylum cases?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have first-degree knowledge about conditions in Mexico, but what I can say from a legal standpoint is that having a case from Mexico as opposed to being in the United States is completely outrageous. Even for families who are here in the United States, it's hard enough to get an attorney. There's no right to a free attorney if you can't afford one, the way there is in the criminal justice system. So the majority of these families, these asylum seekers, are going up against an incredibly complex immigration system without representation. I don't know how anyone can call that due process, and to think that there can be due process from a third country is completely outrageous. I mean, this administration from day one has been trying to restrict both lawful immigration as well as asylum seekers, and this is just the next more egregious step in trying to tighten asylum regulations.
Andrea Guttin is the legal director at Houston Immigration Legal Services Collaborative. Andrea, thank you for a few minutes. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next, President Trump, he likes to brag about a lot of things, including his educational pedigree, specifically his degree from Wharton, and how that makes him a super genius in his words. But the Washington Post, they spoke with the admissions officer who was there at the time, and he recalls things a whole lot differently. The reporter who broke that story, he joins us next.